I'm going to start with a little story. There's a mother and daughter standing on a bow of a cruise ship. Some of you have heard this, but it's so germane for this conversation I have to do it again. Now, they're standing up on the bow and they're standing over the water. You know, you're like a good 3-4 stories off of the ocean floor. And the daughter's trying to coax the mother to come take a look. This is so cool. I mean, look at this. You know, standing at the rail looking over. Terrified heights. Not. After much coercion, we all know how our daughters can be. Sorry, Jade. But anyways, she coaxes her over, and she's standing there and trembling, and she's like, oh my God, my heart's pounding. My head's spinning. I'm shaking. You know, I can't, this is why I don't like this. And the daughter goes, Mom, that's exactly how I feel. What's the difference? The interpretation of that experience of standing over. Completely different worlds because of two completely different perspectives on it. So I'm going to open with that. I think that will make a lot of sense in a little bit. So this conversation tonight is about anxiety. And, you know, as I said in this little promo I did, you know, there's over 40 million people in the United States alone that suffer from anxiety. And even though it's a highly treatable condition, disorder, only less than 37% of people actually get help for it, which is bizarre considering that we live in such an affluent, information-ridden, comfortable life that we should be watching anxiety disorders skyrocket. And it's not the only one, by the way. So part of what I want to talk about tonight is maybe why we're seeing that. Why is it now, in the most comfortable situation, where we have comfort, information, comfort, information, and, comfort, information, and stimulation up the wazoo. Like, why is it that we're still struggling so much? So I'm Adrien, by the way. I'm a spiritual and relational life coach. And that term can be fuzzy for people. Again, as I always say, it's kind of like designed to be that way. I think spiritual is a fuzzy word, almost intentionally, because it's something that's really hard to pin down. But I want to try to help you do that here tonight a little bit. I love to start like this because it gives you context from where I'm coming from. Now, part of what spiritual means to me is I love to swim in the deep end. Like, it's just something I've always been comfortable there, you know, whether it's religion or philosophy and all that kind of stuff. It's just something that I've always been interested in. And I love to share that with people because there's a lot to be offered. Most of us don't live there. So it's nice when somebody can pull us in, show us some things maybe we didn't think about. And the funny thing, my favorite part about all that is when I show people most of the time, they always knew it. They're always like, oh yeah, it's right there. It's in front of your face. It's just we don't take the time to look. So to give context to that, I'm going to start with a quote from the book. My own quote this time. I think that's the first to start with. Anyways. So it goes something like this. The world is not what you think it is. And at the same time, quite often, your world is only what you think it is. The world is not what you think it is. But ironically, at the same time, your world is only what you think it is, quite often. The nuance in that, it's sort of like, I think the coffee maker's got a lot to say over there. No, it's okay, I'm just joking. The nuance in that, if we think about the story I started with, actually, that's that in proof, right? Like, the person standing there getting a thrill out of shaking and the heart pounding and the head spinning, and the person who's terrified of it and it just, you know, had to get dragged over there. The experience is the same. The world is the world. But our experience of it is completely different, or can be. And it's not necessarily, they don't totally coincide all the time. So that's the first one. The second one, and this was a little weird, maybe. What's the difference between heroin and morphine? Does anybody know what the difference is between morphine and heroin? That's true. That is very true. It is very true. Well, I didn't actually know, except I knew that there was a difference because of where I'm going to go with it. But I did research it, and very little, quite honestly. Actually, pretty much nothing, except that in heroin, sometimes they'll cut it with stuff and weird things like that. That's what makes it dangerous, right? But the actual, what happens when we do it is exactly the same. Now, morphine is used in a hospital, and it's a life-changing thing. I mean, what it did for mankind is amazing. It bettered, it enriched life. Heroin destroys lives, we all know it. Why? It's the context in which it's used. This is the difference. One's used for one purpose, to ease pain, to operate, and the other is to escape, right? And the list of those things that we could escape and what we're trying to accomplish when we do heroin is a long conversation. But that is the main, it's the context in which it's used. That is the big difference. So hopefully that'll make more sense as we go on too. But the nuance is very small. That's what I want to say. You know, like that to me, spirituality is about subtlety and nuance. That's like my coin phrase almost, I think, at this point. I live there to point out those small little differences because they're huge and we overlook them. So I want to clearly state my intention here today because I just like to do this is almost like a goal setting sort of thing. My intention is if I could just shift one person's perspective here tonight on what anxiety is and what it has to offer, ironically, I might be shifting it right off the bat. I would be happy. I walk out of here completely happy. So that would be my intention tonight, to shift one person's perspective on what anxiety is and what it has to offer and how to work with it. So we're going to go, all right? We're going to dip our toes in the deep end here because I don't want to go too fast, too crazy, right? But we're going to talk about the human experience. What is the human experience? We're going to start with the six senses. Now, I say six senses because in the Eastern world, that's how they commonly think of it, especially in Buddhism. It's six, not five. They believe in six senses. Now, we all know the five, right? It's eyes, it's sight, smell, hearing. I always have a hard time. Touch, taste, right? Those are the five. In Buddhism or Eastern thought, the sixth one, it isn't ESP, by the way, it's thinking. Thinking is the sixth sense. And I want to point out that this is the dominant sense. I'm going to put that right out there. I mean, I can prove this pretty easily. If you take an apple, you grab the apple, you're touching it, you take a nice juicy bite of that apple, so now you're tasting it, you hear the crunch, you smell the smell. It's a sensory extravaganza, right? If you're not there, if you're thinking about what that person said about you yesterday, you won't even taste that apple. You're just eating it. You won't even experience any of those senses. Now, here, conversely, beautifully too, if you do pull your mind, and this is part of what mindfulness is, right? It could be the best apple you ever ate in your life if you pull your focus and attention into it. So the sixth sense is incredibly important, and it will dominate this conversation here tonight. So that's the six senses. Of course, we got a couple other things going on. One of them is very important, emotion. Right? We didn't talk about that. That's not in the six senses. So our emotional experience, anger, happiness, all these sorts of things, right? I like to say emotion 10x's thought any day. Like it's maybe 50 times, honestly, right? You know, you get an emotion, it comes with 1,000 thoughts typically. You know, especially if it's powerful emotion, it'll pull you right in and you're there. So emotion is a big part of being human. There's just no getting around it. The next one is part of my title, if you will, is relationship. Relating to the outside world. And funny enough, this is where anxiety comes in. This is where we have a breakdown typically in our relationship. And the funny thing too, if you think about it, is we have a relationship with ourselves. It's kind of ironic, right? Or it seems weird, but we do. I think we all know that actually, right? I mean, that conversation we're having in our head all the time is a sort of a form of a relationship that we have. So relationship is another very important part about being human, by the way. We have a relationship. That's why we always bring these sorts of things, because they bring in a beautiful presence. We can relate to these things. I relate to them. The flowers, the stones, the beauty that they offer. There's a relating that goes on there. The weather, the breeze that Joan actually helped bring in here by opening the windows a little bit, right? That's a relationship you're having with the outside world. In anxiety, I don't know how many people here suffer with it. And, of course, there's a difference between anxiety and anxiety disorder, by the way. I don't think I said that, but that is a big difference, and we'll get into that a little bit. If you suffer with anxiety disorder, where it's a little crippling, like where it actually affects your life, quite often, you'll experience this in a place that overstimulates you. Now, not always, but it is probably the most common way. In a really loud place with a lot of people, blah, 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 you can experience anxiety. That's a very common place. Now, funny enough, conversely is the other place, when you're all alone in your room. That's the relationship you have with yourself, by the way. But that stimulation, all that stuff going on, the six senses, the emotions, the relationship, it gets overwhelming. And this is where the breakdown comes. This is where it gets hard. This is where we struggle. So actually, Jade, would you hand out the handouts? I had you that good, did I? I had you enraptured that well. So actually, can somebody give her a hand? Would you give her a hand, honey? Or here, Kaylee's got it, looks like. Yeah. So thank you, only because there's a lot to hand out. So on this, you'll see there's a couple images on the front, and that's what we're going to start with. And these images are there to show in a kind of a tactile way, in an experiential way, how the mind can get jumbled. So when you look at the top image, there's a picture of like a bicycle. There's just two wheels. These are pretty famous images, by the way, which is part of why I chose them. I almost put Scott's image in there where he had the egg crates. Do you remember that? No, anyways, it was very cool. It was very much the same sort of thing. But so if you look at the wheels, and it doesn't work for everybody or as easily as everybody, but if you look at the wheels, they look like they give you an optical illusion that they're moving. For me, actually, if I look at one and I kind of peripherally look at the other, that happens for me the most. There's a little clue in there. So it creates the illusion of movement, right? That's what, by the way, you were supposed to cue. Oh, and actually, for anybody who's watching online, I do want to say, because I forgot to say this last time, if you look in the description of your YouTube stream there is a link that you can click that will take you to see this exact handout so that you can actually experience this with us. So it looks like it's spinning. If you take the other one, what you're supposed to do is you put your finger over the middle line. You look like A and B are two different colors. If you put your finger over the middle line, you actually realize they're exactly the same color. You have to do it you have to cover up just the right part, and it creates an illusion. So what I'm trying to show you here in a tactile way is this is actually what goes on in anxiety. It creates an illusion. Now, it's really important for me. I don't want to even go 1 second further, because I say a statement like, anxiety is an illusion. I don't want anybody thinking that I'm diminishing your experience of anxiety. When we have anxiety, it's extremely real. So I don't want to make it sound like it's something that, it's just an illusion, get over it, That'd be the furthest thing from my heart. So I really want to make sure that that's clear. But at the same time, what happens in these pictures is it jumbles the mind, especially on the one with the movement. Actually, both of them do the same thing in a certain way. They do it differently, but they jumble the mind so that it confuses your eyes. Anxiety is a jumbling of the mind, confuses your mind, and confuses your heart. It's an overload, if you will. And we're going to start getting into deeper waters here as we start moving forward. This is the jumble. This is what's happening, is thinking is trying to take it all in. It's trying to take all that stuff I talked about, the six senses, the emotions, the relationship, and it's trying to process it all. One of the first illusions that I think anxiety creates is it goes under the pretense that it's there to protect you. That you're experiencing anxiety because this is not good, we got to do something about this is not, this is not good, this is not good. Quite honestly, that's almost never the case. And we can know this too, by the way, because when we have a real problem, like if there's really something happening, like a car crash or something really dramatic, we never experience anxiety. We will experience it after, potentially, But in that experience, that's never, because that takes time. That's part of when the mind starts to try to deal with it. But in the moment, you never experience anxiety. Which is part of how this is part of the proof, or I'm trying to prove to you, that it is an illusion that our mind creates. So it's an interesting thing to note. The second illusion, if I can remember, is that it's the fact that we have anxiety about anxiety. That's actually where disorder comes from. Because it's just like that illusion. We think that anxiety is the problem. Anxiety isn't the problem. We all experience anxiety. Everybody has experienced anxiety in their life. When we have anxiety disorder, when it's difficult, when it's challenging, and it disrupts our life, we're having anxiety about anxiety. We're resisting the experience of anxiety. And we all know what happens when we do that. But we'll get into that more later. We evoke a lot of dissidence. But anxiety is that illusion that we think that it's trying to do something for us that it's not actually doing. That it's actually the problem, right? The anxiety of anxiety. So I like to talk about this in the way that the mind is trying to take all this stuff in and deal with it. And that's wonderful if it could do it. But it obviously can't. I mean, I have no problem. We wouldn't be talking about this, right? It's the metaphor I always use is it's the mind, thinking, is a fantastic passenger to have in your car. It's a terrible driver. Don't let it drive your car, the vehicle of your life. And I don't know if you've noticed, by the way, but it does. Every single person in here, thinking drives our lives. It leads us into problems, though. It's like giving the keys to a 5-year-old. You know, they're not equipped, or a 10-year-old. I don't want to, I'm not trying to disparage thinking. Thinking is a wonderful thing, by the way. I mean, there's something wrong with thinking, obviously. I mean, look at where we are. I mean, I'm talking to somebody across the country right now, almost for sure, because of thinking, right? It's fantastic. It's a great passenger. It's not a very good driver. So this is an important thing to remember as we're trying to walk our way through what's going on as a human being. We are totally wrapped up in that. So if we're not thinking, if we're not thought, if we're not our mind, then what are we? Now we're about to dive in. I got to go there, by the way. This is my job as far as I feel. So I'm going to say 3 words. And what I'm really excited about this, I woke up this morning like totally psyched about this talk. And I think one of the things I was really excited about was that anybody who was here for the last one, for Authentic Personal Power, I think we're going to start getting a stronger scent. I was talking about we're going to try to smell out what it is. What is authentic personal power? It's kind of hard to know what it actually is. It's one of those nuanced, subtle things. But I think we're going to get a little closer into understanding that, I hope, tonight. So I'm going to say 3 words. Consciousness, awareness, and focus. Consciousness, awareness, and focus. There could be a lot of debate over these words, and I don't want to do that. If somebody wants to debate, we can maybe do that later. But to think about this is very challenging, and I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how am I going to express this in a way that will make some sense. So of course I have to do a metaphor. All these things are always metaphoric in that way. Now it's a metaphor, so it's not perfect, but we could think of it's kind of like a layer sort of thing, or a developmental sort of thing, or an expansion sort of thing. We got focus, awareness, consciousness. It's kind of like consciousness is the sun, if you think of it that way. It gets everywhere. It's everywhere. There's no place that the sun doesn't get, even in the caves, right? There's certain rays that get through there. Awareness is the lens. And focus is that beam that comes out. So we take the sun, we hit it through awareness, and we focus it in. We don't kill ants, by the way. We only burn wood or something cool like that. So that's the 3 things. That's the way I'm going to try to explain it to you so we can talk about it a little bit. Consciousness is the sun. It is ultimately what we are. Awareness is the beginning of the focusing of that everything. And focusing is the laser beam, right? So what we have done as human beings is we've focused in on thought. And it's a very sticky substance. I don't know why that is. It's very complicated to talk about that in great detail. It's, we're trying to keep this short here tonight. But that's what's happened. And we can know, though, because we can pull our focus off. We can pull our focus off of thought and experience something else, even if it is only an emotion. We can do that. That's part of proof of the fact that that's what it is, that we are not thinking. There's so many experiences that you've had where you've realized, well, actually you probably haven't realized maybe, but that you've experienced something besides thinking. A lot of times this happens in two situations. One, it's either something very extreme as far as trauma, funny enough, something really bad, and it grounds us. And it's like your mind stops. You're just dumbfounded. You're like, I don't know what just happened, but you're so present at the same time. I don't know if anyone here has ever had that experience, but it's a profound experience. We tend to remember them, by the way. They tend to be things that, and even hard times once we get out of them can be that way. The other is great beauty is a very common way, too. You're standing on the ocean and the sunset's just right and the breeze is just right and everything shuts down and you're just there. It could be that apple, by the way. If it's just right, if you're just in that right place and it's just the perfect apple and you taste it and you're just there. There's no thinking about it. All those things are going on, by the way. All those six senses, emotions, you could be feeling something, your relationship's totally on. But the thinking is really quieted down. This is proof, by the way. The other proof is, if you haven't noticed, thinking never stays still. And a lot of times it doesn't even make any sense. I don't know how much you paid attention to your own thinking. If you haven't, that would be the biggest thing you could probably pull out of here tonight. It's an interesting thing to watch. It can go from one thing to the next thing. Anxiety is certainly an example of that, right? It's when it gets out of control. It's all jumbled. It takes over, thinking about thinking. But the next moment, it could be 5 minutes, it could be 5 days, and it's completely different. Same thing about emotion. These are not who we are. They're experiences we have, but they're not who we are. It's important to notice that. So consciousness, awareness, focus, what we put our focus on is what we get out of life. That's why when we're totally wrapped up in thinking, that's what we get. And we run into trouble. Because when we do that, by the way, we've given the keys over. We've given the keys to thinking, and we run the car into the ditch. That's just what happens. One way or another. A lot of it, too, is because thinking cannot capture it all. It cannot encompass all of the things that are going on. So, to turn focus back. By the way, I forgot to mention this. We're all conscious beings. We're all aware of that. This is what differentiates us between animals as far as we can tell. We can contemplate that we're here. We can think about the past. We remember the past. We can project into the future. These are the things that kind of distinguish us. This is consciousness in a certain way. And we're all aware of it, that we have it, that's what makes us different. That's why we built all these things. And have you ever thought about consciousness? What is it? You know that you have it, but what is consciousness? Very, very few of us have spent time in that water, by the way. And it's deep water. And it's grounding water, by the way. It's a very grounding thing to get in touch with that. I don't know if you could feel it right then. When I talk about pulling us into the present moment, hopefully you can feel that. When you think about that moment you've had with the sunset or something, those were always very grounding. You don't have anxiety during those times. You're very grounded. And that's because you're in touch with the source, if you will. You're in touch with that thing that is the real you, that doesn't fluctuate all over the place. This is turning focus back on itself. When you focus, when I just did that, when I said, have you ever thought about what is consciousness? That takes the focus and turns it back around. And all of a sudden you're like, that is interesting. I've never really thought about that much. And you kind of have a quick experience of it. So, we're going to get into modern the technology part of this conversation, why I said modern epidemic. We're going to ease into that. I'm going to have a sip of water here if you don't mind. So why is it that 14 and 17-year-olds are the biggest growing margin in anxiety and depression? Now, there's going to be a lot of theories about that, but I want to put out this one, and it goes into this focus, awareness, consciousness thing. So, in our life, in our modern day life, we have turned it into a science, comfort, stimulation, information. And while just like thinking is not a bad thing, these things are not bad, but when we misuse them, by the way, when we turn them from morphine into heroin, when we can't stop looking at our phone, when we have to constantly be seeking out some form of comfort, whether it's the next drink or the next, and you name it, right? Thing to look at, or the list of things goes on. Our culture is built on that. Now, part of that is because of our ability to do so, right? Like the information age. How much information do we need, really? How much information can we process, by the way? If this isn't heightening anxiety, I don't know what is. I mean, you're giving yourself so much to think about. It was already hard enough to think about the basics. Now we can think about everything, and we could really check it out. Now, is that, by the way, we're here for information, right? So it's not a bad thing. It's how we use it. It's that subtlety. It's the morphine, heroin sort of switch, right? Is it an addiction, or is it something that's serving our life? Now, what does this have to do with focus, awareness, and consciousness? When we indulge in comfort, information, and stimulation all the time, we weaken ourselves. We weaken that focus. We aid the jumbling because we are never focused, actually. We're never there in the moment because there's always something else. Here it is, right? Like I'm about Adrien comes home from work. I have a lucky life. I'm a very fortunate person here. So I come home from work, and hopefully something's cooking, right? No, probably not. That's okay, though. We're over that. But so if I'm lucky, something's cooking. No, she cooks every night, just not always when I get home, right? So, and I'm lucky. This is what I mean. But anyway, so I can walk in the door. Hey, honey, what's cooking, right? I mean, what's that smell? What are you making? You know, cool. I'm gonna go change. I go change. My mind's thinking about the food she's making. Before I even sit my butt on the chair to eat this wonderful food that you've made, my mind's already thinking, gee, I wonder if there's any of that cake left. I'm eating my food, but I'm already thinking about the cake, right? Then it's time to get the cake. I'm cutting the cake. I'm not happy with the cake. I'm thinking about, gee, what can I watch on TV while I eat this cake? I sit down. That's right. I was so looking forward to this episode. And I sit down, and I'm eating my cake, and I'm watching the show, and I'm like, gee, ice cream would be really good with this cake. Right? And the list goes on. I mean, this thing is never ending. There's nothing wrong with that, by the way, unless we don't have control over it. By the way, we've already I'm a bad swear, so I'm going to really try to, we've already probably checked our phones 4 friggin' times in that time that I elapsed. Most of us. This is the new world. Where's the focus? I wonder why we feel jumbled. I wonder why we feel confused. I wonder why we feel lost sometimes. And I just scratched the surface of it, guys. I've just scratched the surface of it. And I'm not a conspiracist, by the way. But it works really well for the big machine. It works really well for people who are trying to sell stuff. When you have no ability to control yourself, you're their pawn. And again, this is not I'm not trying to sell anything about that either. It's just a simple fact, though. I think we all know it, actually, about ourselves. We buy things we don't need. Why? Because we don't have control over it. Why? Because we don't have any focus. We are talking about anxiety, believe it or not, by the way. This is absolutely about anxiety because this is our inability to control our thinking. When we're having anxiety about anxiety or thinking about thinking, we're wrapped up in the feedback loop. Ding. So, so this is so much what we're talking about. Again now, though, there is a way. And we're going to start easing into what we can do about this a little bit. But first, I want to talk about this a little bit more as far as what does consciousness, awareness, and focus have to do with this? Maybe it's self-evident, and I hope it is. But when we don't have the ability to pull it in, to take the keys away from thinking, we're not in control. We're slaves to it. And it doesn't matter, by the way, it doesn't have to be anxiety. Like we talked, it could be depression. It could be compulsive disorders. It can be all kinds of things like that. It's when it short circuits. It's when it is at the wheel. So, to move into what we can do about this can be a very long conversation, and we're going to keep it short. There is a Q&A, as she said, as Joan mentioned, so you'll have your chance if I'm not saying enough, which I'm sure won't. But the first step, and every step after this is part of what I love about my job and how I see the world. Every step after this is going to be counterintuitive almost. It's almost not what you think. We're going to turn it on its head. So the first one is to see anxiety for what it is. Anxiety is trying to tell you something. Are you listening? If you had a pain in your leg, you would say, depending on if it's a cramp, you'd be like, oh God, did I pull this, or am I dehydrated? Or you'd be thinking about what's wrong with my leg, right? If it was a sharp pain, is something poking my leg? This is what it's telling you. Something's wrong with my leg. When we have anxiety, it's the same thing. And by the way, thank God. Gee, am I dehydrated? Better drink some water, right? Is there something poking me? Get it away. We know what to do. Anxiety is the same thing. It's trying to tell you something. Are you listening? And the thing that it's trying to tell you is everything I just explained, actually. There's a little too much thinking going on, guys. It's a little out of control. You let me take the wheel too long. It's trying to tell you that. And don't believe me, by the way. And there's nothing I'm saying that I would want you to believe me about. I want you to think about it and experiment with it. It's an important thing, especially if you're struggling with this. It's the first thing, though. Think about it. Depending on where you are and how serious the anxiety attack or whatever you're going through is, if you welcome it, or if you say, hey, what are you trying to tell me here? You've already turned it on its head. You've already stopped the anxiety about anxiety. And in small cases, it may be enough, believe it or not, to shift that experience, to be like, gee, what was I thinking about? I've been thinking about, I was thinking about this, and then this, and then that's, holy cow, listening. A lot of times we're just thinking, by the way. This is the part where, we're not paying attention. So that's the first step. That's the first thing I would recommend doing, is paying attention, thinking about what is it trying to tell me. Almost, I know this may be pushing it, being thankful for it. Is there anything here that I could pull away from? Second one, authentic personal power. This was the talk last time. By the way, I don't know if anybody caught that about the consciousness, awareness, focus, but that's a little bit of what I was talking about, authentic personal power. And when I did the talk, I was talking about like the medicine show guys that would be like, I have this elixir and it cures the flu and colds and warts and, you name it for $9.99, right? That's what I'm saying. I actually am saying that's what authentic personal power is. It will solve all of your problems. I'm not selling it for $9.99, unfortunately. But, no, honestly, fortunately, this is the thing I pointed out last time. Thank God I can't sell it to you. Because if I could sell it to you, I could deny it from you. If I could give it to you, you could lose it. You could run out. Authentic personal power you have. If you didn't have it, you wouldn't be here. So, getting in touch with authentic personal power is the key to dealing with anxiety, to dealing with depression, dealing with you name it. When you're in your authentic personal power, I pride myself on being as honest as I possibly can. So let's say you're in 50% authentic personal power. So you're feeling pretty good though. You're like, yeah, I'm feeling this. I'm getting the gist of what he's talking about. Doesn't mean you're not going to experience anxiety. Not going to feel the whole gambit of emotion. But you're not going to have anxiety disorder anymore. That I promise you. I know, and that's a big promise, but I feel comfortable in saying it. So one of the other things that I want to point out about that too, as far as when you think about, you have it already. Nobody can take it away from you. It's only a matter of uncovering it, of taking the focus, by the way, the laser beam, and pulling it in, turning it back on itself, paying a little attention to awareness and consciousness. This is an important thing. And it is the key. It is the key. Sorry. So, authentic personal power is another way. The law of dissidence. This is a big thing that I've coined, that I'm trying to coin, and it's my... Now, if you look on your thing there is a readout. I'm trying to think. I'm not going to actually read it because I want to keep this as short as I can here. So I'm certainly not going to read the whole thing. One of the fun things is, though, if you were here for the authentic personal power, you got the first movement. This one's the second. There was the outer movement. It was about the outside world. This is about the inner world and how we have dissidence against ourselves. How we struggle within ourselves over a myriad of things. This is the inner movement of the law of dissidence. So the law of dissidence works pretty simple. It's like if you have children, everyone's experienced it. If you tell your child to do something and you push them too hard, they all of a sudden don't. I love this because it can even be something they like to do, right? If they like to do it, and you're like, hey, come on, we're going to go to the park. It's going to be so much fun. Yeah, okay. No, it's going to be great, don't you think? Yeah. It's a beautiful day. We're going to. Next thing, you push that too hard. I don't want to go. What do you mean you don't want to go? You love going to the park, You've evoked the law of dissidence. And what that is you have impinged on the sovereignty of that child. You're trying to force them to feel a certain way. This is an exterior movement of the law of dissidence, by the way. We do this interiorly by having anxiety about anxiety. Right? I don't know if you can see that. You're pushing it. You don't want it. You don't want to experience. You don't want to feel anxiety. And by the way, of course you don't. Of course you don't. It's not a pleasant feeling. But that doesn't mean it doesn't have place for you. That doesn't mean that it doesn't have something to offer you. One of the things I was going to say about anxiety, that even if you're in touch with with authentic personal power, and you still experience anxiety, which, by the way, I'm grateful for that. Because the last thing I want to be is the guy that knows it all. The guy that's here to tell you, anxiety? Pfft, I used to have anxiety. This is how you deal with it. Right? That's the last. Where's the sensitivity in that? And by the way, that's where you go if you never experienced it, something anymore. It's a bit humbling. It's not always fun. I don't always enjoy it, but it always keeps me in contact with other people like that. It helps me appreciate where they might be. It's like that Robin Williams, quote, right? I can't even remember how it was exactly, but you never know the struggle that somebody's having, right? Well, you certainly never know if you don't care, right? And if you're so full of yourself because you've totally conquered anxiety, I think it's one of those counterintuitive things again, Like, well, I just want to be done with it. Yeah, but maybe it serves a purpose. Because the whole world isn't done with it, by the way. Maybe it helps give empathy. This is what it does for me. It gives me opportunity, too, to check myself, turn the focus laser beam back and say, I am feeling pretty anxious. What's going on? It's a good opportunity. It's a good sign, focus. So the law of dissidence. I didn't say this, and I wanted to say this right away, because I don't know how many of you actually struggle with anxiety disorder. But any of these things I'm talking about have to be done prior. And I know that's a bummer. You want a quick fix, right? You're having an anxiety attack, and you want to be like, the guy didn't tell me anything to do when I'm having an attack. And some of these things I did. But they're not going to work. When you've given the keys to the thinking, to the kid, and he's halfway in the ditch, there's not there. And that's okay, by the way. That's another way. That's one of the tools I can give you. Like, the best thing you can do then is write it out. Is to see what you can pull out of it besides just totally buying into it. But more than likely, you're going to be totally bought in. By the way, this works, right? When you're really angry, what are you going to do? I mean, once it's there, you had lots of choices maybe as you were running up to it. But once it's there, it's full blown. You're in the ditch. So the work that has to be had here with anxiety disorder has to be done prior. It has to be done when you're okay. Or you're very mild, something really mild's going on. It's an excellent opportunity. It's an excellent opportunity to watch how you might be evoking the law of dissonance. Am I struggling with this? It's such a small little thing I'm experiencing. I'm feeling this feeling. I know this feeling well. It's anxiety. Where in me am I pushing it away? This is a really useful technique when it's mild. You can watch yourself. By the way, all law of dissonance works on force. You're pushing, you're forcing. There's no power there. This is all the last talk, but there's no power in that. It's all pushed force. So when you're pushing like that is when you get the push back. If you were to put power into that, which is presence, which is, by the way, Adrien, having an anxiety attack, or not an attack, but an anxiety, I'm feeling anxiety. I'm okay with it. I'm in touch with some of my power in that way. And when I do that, it comes and it goes. By the way, so does happiness. So does sadness. They come and they go. Only when we struggle and fight with them, we empower them, ironically. That's the law of dissonance, by the way. I mean, some of you haven't heard much about it, but that's a lot of what that is, whether it's our child or our inner world, which is what we're trying to focus on here today. So the other thing I do want to point out is that force, law of dissidence sort of stuff, comes from a place of lack. That's when we force. When we feel like we're not up to it. I just can't deal with this. And it's understandable, by the way, and maybe you can't at that moment. But that's when we push. When we're in our power, it comes from a place of abundance. I'm just trying to give you little hints of how to understand the differences if you pay attention to this now. It's a useful thing to notice. There is a difference there. It's subtle, but it's that subtle that's completely different. Like in my world, force and power aren't even the same thing at all. They're almost diametrically opposed, even though the difference seems to be so small. And this is part of the anxiety thing. So another one this is the standby. I mean, this is what everybody talks about, mindfulness. And I don't know if you've noticed, I've already talked about it a lot, in a weird way, not in the way that you're probably used to hearing. I mean, usually it's you're washing dishes, pay attention to washing the dishes, don't pay attention to anything else. Very good advice, by the way. Mindfulness is a very powerful way of helping and dealing with anxiety. But why? I think it's so powerful, or so important and powerful to understand why. Why is that chain I was talking about, or that level? You're getting closer to consciousness, to what you really are, to your authentic personal power. When you're mindful, that's what you're doing. You're pulling that focus in, and you're getting in touch with that deeper part. This is what mindfulness actually is. That's what's actually occurring. You don't have to know that for it to work, honestly, but it works better. It's like a 10x sort of thing, too, when you really understand what you're doing and why. To be mindful is to get in touch with authentic personal power, consciousness, your root cause, who you really are. So, in the list too, or in the handout here in the pamphlet, there's also the welcoming prayer. These are just things I'm trying to give as little tidbits of ways that we can deal with anxiety if we are struggling with it. The welcoming prayer is not mine. It's pretty famous. I know it's helped thousands upon thousands of people. I'm not going to go over it right now. I just wanted to point it out to you. And you can see right off the bat, too, that it is, by the way, welcoming. It's counterintuitive immediately. It's immediately turning it on its head like that. Whatever it is you're experiencing, if you welcome it, you've shifted it already. Then it does get into mindfulness, actually. You're getting into your body and you're feeling what you're experiencing whenever you're experiencing whatever it is, whether it's anxiety or depression or anger, all these different things. The welcoming prayer is very powerful to us, so I thought I'd put it in. It's not mine. It comes from the Contemplative Outreach. It's fantastic. If you Google it, you'll find it. So it's a great tool. Another one that I wasn't sure I was going to say, but that's more personal to me, is a sacred word. This also comes from the contemplative way. But it's, in the contemplative Christian tradition, they have a thing called centering prayer. And it's pretty much meditation, by the way, guys. That's what it is, right? But in their form of meditation, you have a sacred word. You pick the small word. Something easy to remember, something that's meaningful to you. Not overly meaningful, but meaningful to you. And when you're sitting there praying, meditating, you have this word ready. So when the thought comes, and thinking tries to take the keys to the car, and you say the sacred word. And it's what it is you build in information there, meaning, or I should say power there in a way that you've given this word the permission to say, okay, I say this word and I let that thought go. It's just a trigger. It's a way of saying, okay, reaffirming why you're sitting there praying or meditating, right? I use this a lot in my meditation. It's actually probably the primary way that I meditate. I found it to be incredibly powerful, and I'm going to share something I wasn't sure I was going to share this either. I'm going to have a couple quotes here at the end, and my word comes from one of the quotes, actually, funny enough. So I have found it useful throughout my life, though. Now, I have given it lots of power from hours and hours and hours of meditation. But you can do that, too. You can link it to positive things in your life. So if you find a word that, it could be love, it could be God, it could be forgiveness, it could be a myriad of things. Anything that turns you on in a way. You usually want it to be short, though, because it's supposed to be kind of concise. You don't want to get wrapped up in the word. Like some law, like the world is not what you think it is. Like that's too much, right? We want something quick. So what you do is when you're having that moment in front of the sunset, you say the word. You're throwing a little power. It's like you're putting a little deposit in the bank. You do this many times. There's children's, so I'll lead out some of the other really cool places you could do that. But so, right? Yeah, it's a good way. But so you're empowering that word, though. And then when you find yourself in that situation, you say that word as a welcome, as a way to trigger. Now, it's not going to change your whole experience, but it's a way of taking a little bit of the keys back, if you will. It's like taking your hand on the wheel. No, you're going too far. You're about to go in the ditch. It actually really works. I encourage you to try it out, especially if you struggle with stuff like that. So the sacred word. Again, if you Googled that, I'm sure you'd find a lot more information on it. Centering prayer, sacred word, I would think it would come right up. So I'm going to end with two quotes. One is from the Bhagavad Gita, which is the Hindu Bible. I don't know if anybody's familiar with it. It was Gandhi's favorite. That was what he lived by. So we talked about Gandhi a bit in the last talk. So here it goes. Wherever the mind wanders, restless and diffuse in its search for satisfaction outside, lead it within. Train it to rest in the self. Abiding joy comes to those who still the mind. One more time. Wherever the mind wanders, restless and diffuse in its search for satisfaction outside, lead it within. Train it to rest in self, in authentic personal power, by the way. Self, capital S. Abiding joy comes to those who still the mind. I love this. I'm so excited to share this all with you, and I really appreciate y'all being here. Partially, too, because this is the kind of thing that I don't think people understand. Still the mind. Still the mind. Still the mind, still the mind, still the mind. It's like, everybody knows. We already know this. Even if we're not spiritual people, we know we're not supposed to, enlightenment is a quiet mind. It's not what you think it is, by the way. It's not what you think it is. I've already asked, I hour. I'm not bragging, I just do. Spent hours upon hours upon hours meditating. Twice a day if I'm lucky. My mind is not quiet, by the way. I'm a busy guy. I don't know if you could tell, by the way. I'm an extroverted guy. I didn't come up with all this shit by not, thinking about it. I think a lot. I don't believe my thoughts. That's the difference. Big difference. We think the goal is to stop thinking. It's not to stop thinking. Now, funny enough, the more you get into it, I just kind of going to contradict myself, but you do quiet down. I don't think the way I used to think. But lots of thoughts are going through there. I just want to point that out because it's one of those misnomers. People don't get it, I don't think. So I can't tell you how many people, I've tried meditating, I can't do it. My mind's just too busy. That's the point. That's the point of meditation, is to notice how busy your mind is. That's like the biggest thing you can accomplish from meditation, actually. Because really, most of the time, we know it, but we're not really paying attention to it. Believe it or not, there's so much power there. So, on to the next quote. The next quote is from Jesus. And actually, as everybody who was here last time knows, that I'm a bit of a Jesus freak, I am. So, I am quoting from something that will probably, as I just said, I'm a bit of a Jesus freak. It probably wouldn't sit with a lot of Christians, but it's from the Gospel of Thomas. And there's a long lineage there of what that is and where it comes from. I don't know if anybody knows. Does anybody know what the Gospel of Thomas is? Okay, yeah. So, great book, just as legitimate in my mind as any of the rest. It's not in the canonical Bible. It's not in the regular Holy Bible, but for this reason I say, whoever is undivided will be full of light, but whoever is divided will be full of darkness. I will. Thank you for the invite. I appreciate that. Now I don't feel self-conscious about repeating myself. For this reason I say, whoever is undivided will be full of light, but whoever is divided will be full of darkness. Darkness is a heavy word, by the way. And I talked to my wife about this before, right before. She doesn't usually know anything I'm going to say because it's more fun that way. But I wanted to say, is that a little heavy? A little just putting it in there. And it is a little bit. But only when you don't understand. It's kind of like, still your mind is sort of heavy. That's a tall freaking order, right? Darkness, confused, scrambled, jumbled, and lost. Right? Darkness, that's all. Confused. Does that make sense? Light, the sun, the fullness of it, the abiding joy. It exists. You're experiencing it. If I did my job at all well tonight, maybe you experienced it for 1 second, I would leave a happy man. To feel in this moment with me right now. To be here in this moment, all together, this gigantic display of relationship, by the way. We're all sharing this space. This is the fullness. And I hope nobody's experiencing anxiety right now. I might be a little bit, because I'm up here, but that's not fair. So, again, for this reason I say, whoever is undivided, not scattered, not unfocused all the time, will be full of light. I thank you guys very much. So, thank you. So this is the part where we really usually open it up for Q&A. There is a microphone. I'm just going to say this because the people watching online can't hear you because I have microphones on. You will not hear yourself, though, by the way. So it'll only, like, it's not going to amplify you. I don't even know if that's working today, actually. But it's not going to amplify you, but they will hopefully hear it. There is a button on the microphone. We had this problem last time. Try not to push the button if you're actually holding it, because we lost some people. Like, it turned off. So that was a tragedy, because you could hear it so good. By the way, I think that thing's better than this thing. So I will open it to any questions. Does anybody have any questions? Yes. Yeah. It could.
You're only as happy as you feel or make yourself feel. Like, those are good.
Sure.
Like those.
No, there's a lot of truth to it, right? No, there's a lot of truth to that. There's a lot. Well, that comes back to that quote. If you think about my quote, as far as like the world, your world is only what you think it is. Quite often, by the way, it's not true. That's why it quite often is in that phrase. It's a really important part, because even though it is your experience of the world, it is not the world, and it's not your only potential experience of the world. So it's important to note. But when you're in the thick of it, when you're, what's the first quote? About yourself, right? When you're feeling bad about yourself, right? Yeah, you're in the thick of it. It's very real. It's very real. Yeah. No, nothing. What? Any other questions or any other comments? I mean, it doesn't have to just be a question. You know what they say, if there's no questions, then I either did a really good job or a really bad one. So that's up to you guys. Are we good? Cool. That's short. Joan's going to be very happy. Last time we really ran it into the ground, she was like, what?
So, do you think that paranoia would be considered anxiety? Like, do you think it would be the same thing, and do you think that's how you would deal with it the same?
That's a big one, baby. Gosh. Sure. Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah, hold on. Can you repeat it? What you just said here?
I said that fear is part of anxiety. And I have no idea what I said after that.
Once you got a microphone in your hand, right? I know.
Paranoia does stem from fear.
Sure.
And fear being part of anxiety is certainly going to be a characteristic of that.
Yes, and I couldn't agree more. And I my kids said, by the way, if we actually do get into a tennis match or Q&A, make my answers shorter, which is hard. But so I could get into, actually the book is a lot about that. It's about 10 perspectives, and they're limited perspectives and expanded perspectives, and it's based on the 6 senses. Is the first perspective. We believe it. That's all we think we are. The second one is we think that we're separate. Because of that, when we think that all there is what we see, I could go into this, right? But the next thing is that you feel separate. Here I am, and there you are. We're separate. Nothing could be further from the truth, by the way, Mike, but it feels that way. It feels that way. When we buy into that, fear is the next one. Because here I am all by myself. Fear is the next natural response. And they say, fear is typically considered the root of all those little nasty feelings. There you go. Right. Because they're so diametrically opposed in that way too, right? Anyways, anybody else? Anything? Yeah.
I just wanted to go back to, you said, we were talking about how many thoughts you have in your brain never shutting down and all that. There was a book, and I wish I could remember the name of it. Joan might know it. It's How We Decide or How Decisions Are Made or something like that. It's an excellent book. If you haven't read it, it's an absolutely excellent book. And what it delved into a lot is how now in this time, in this day and age, people used to make a decision between that and that, or maybe that and that. Now we have to make a decision between that.
Yes.
And chances are the decisions we're making are not only, they're not good for us, they're not the ones we really wanted, the outcome we wanted. We may think we want purple, but we really wanted yellow, but we saw so many purples and so many people said, oh, I love, so we go off our own. But that's what thoughts can do. It's the same thing. I was thinking about that book came to mind as you were talking about.
Yeah, that's cool.
That decisions that we make with all of this information you would think would be the better decision, but it is often
That's the
not.
fun. Comfort, stimulation, information, right?
Exactly.
Overload. It's funny because the guy I talked about at the very end of the last one where I quoted Adrien, I just heard him talk, he talked about that. I went to the grocery store to buy peanut butter and there's 20 choices of peanut butter. I mean, God, it was really difficult to pick a peanut butter, but why should there be 20 choices? I mean, this gets dangerous, right? I mean, there's nothing wrong with that in a way, but there almost is, right? It's an overload. It's an overload. This is part of why we're experiencing these things more.
Anxiety inducing.
Exactly.
Are we making the right choice? Are we doing the right thing?
Yeah, always. Right. Weighing all that information, weighing all those choices, you know. Yeah, absolutely. It's a big part of the whole thing. So, yeah, Joe.
There's just a book, I just a brand new book called The Art of Noticing.
Ah.
I just took it home, and it's
Yeah.
it's great. There's different chapters about that you don't pay any attention to what you're doing, and one of them was kind of cool. I did it before I found the book. I have a nice ride to work. I moved, and so I drive like 10 miles, and there's a lot of barns around me. So one day when I was driving to work, I thought, I'm going to count the barns there are.
Yeah.
And I counted 18 barns on the way to work, and I
That's
thought, I never
fantastic.
noticed them before.
Yeah.
So now and it says pick something that you're mindful of. Look at, just find mailboxes or something that you never noticed before. And it's really a kind of a cool.
Yeah, you know what you're doing, Joan? You're getting in touch with your authentic personal power there, lady.
The book is great. It's brand new, and I still have it. So if you want it in the library, it's called The Art
that's
of Noticing. But it's
The
really,
Art of
it's a
Noticing.
nice little book that you just open it up somewhere, and it just gives you some like cool.
I love those books. Those are
yeah,
the best,
something
right?
that you can look at.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Well, that's
just-
fantastic. Thank you for that. And it's funny because, I mean, it sounds like I'm overstating it when I say but I'm not. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, Joan, that's what you're doing. Now, you're doing it more if you're aware of it. You know what I mean? Like, meaning that if I point that out, hopefully that helps you realize what you're doing. Because you're getting in touch with something different, something deeper, something that you weren't paying attention to before, right? It may be a baby step, but I'm a big fan of baby steps, by the way. Baby steps are real. This is how we build a strong foundation. You know, we don't want to try to stop. That's why you can't try to stop an anxiety, you know, like overnight. You know, I mean, that's what pills are supposed to do. And pills help and can be useful. But again, it's like the elixir, right? I mean, if we're dependent on the pill, what happens if we don't have the pill, right? Pills can be great to get us to the next level, next stage, where we can gain control of ourselves a little bit more. But again, the hope would be to start opening these new dimensions within ourselves where we have control of the keys. We decide what we're going to think about while we're driving to work, right? And sure, exactly. Or think God knows what you could be thinking about. I mean, you know, the fight you had the night before, or not even that stupid thing your husband said the night before that's like just pissing you off. You know, well, hey, I'll pay attention to Barnes. And actually, if all of a sudden that doesn't matter as much, funny enough. You know. Anyways. Yeah.
I was thinking about overthinking and kind of the metaphor you talked about when it's perspective on whether something's helpful or crosses over into being harmful. How can you kind of recognize when you cross over from helpful thinking to overthinking?
That's a great question. That's a really good question. I'm really glad that you asked that. So, and I'm hesitating here because it's such a good question that's difficult to answer, right? I mean, meaning that it's a nuanced sort of thing. Yeah, you could tell already, right? So this is why doing something prior, meaning having some sort of practice, right? Whether it's meditation or this myriad of things, right? Because we get a sense of what's right. I know that's kind of a lame answer, and we'll go more, but you get a sense of, I'm overthinking. And quite honestly, overthinking is done pretty quick. It's pretty amazing how little you actually need to think about things. We just spend a lot of time thinking about them, you know. I think that's part of why, like, I find the spiritual life so useful in my world, right? Because my mind likes to be active. And if I'm not careful, it just wants to be active. Well, I have learned lots of ways to be active about all sorts of things, meaning beauty. It likes to be active, so I will pay attention to the clouds in the sky. Why? Because I'll notice, gee, I'm thinking a little too much about this. I've already thought 5 times about what I'm going to do when I get to work. Right? I'm not gaining any new territory here. So all of a sudden, I don't know if this makes any sense, but then because I do have a busy mind, I have learned to pull it into different places. Now, there's multiple. We are so much more than our 6 senses. It's not even funny. I can't express that much differently, you know, because that's a whole other talk, you know. Not even one that I'm all that, you know, into talking about, because it gets too much, you know. But we are, and if we start looking, taking the focus and turning it around a little bit and finding something else, you'll start noticing that you're a lot more. You know, we had 2 talks ago was about vulnerability. Vulnerability is a lot about that. When we're willing to be vulnerable, we'll have experiences in life that we never knew existed before. But we can't be, you know, the quote I used from the book before was that you'll only be vulnerable if you have a sense of your authentic personal power. Ironically, you'll only develop more authentic personal power by being vulnerable. I don't know if that's a lot, right? Did that make sense? You know, you're not going to put it out there unless you're feeling okay about yourself. If you're constantly in fear, right, Gary? You're not going to step out. You're not going to risk that thing. But without risking that thing, you'll never develop your authentic personal power. You'll never have a sense of yourself, who you really are. You'll never know just what you're capable of. And I'm not talking about goal setting. I'm not talking about the millions you could make or all the people that could love you. I'm talking about something even way better than that, honestly. That you could be real with your wife in ways that you never knew you could be. And your relationship could be things that you never knew it could be. Sorry. Long answer. I know it was a very long answer. Anything else? Anybody? I should have. See, why don't we talk about these things? You always have the best time. The reason we have handouts is because of Leah. I want to say thank you, Leah. There's so much work, but I mean, it's okay. No. Handouts aren't. I know. I don't have to see because. Anyways, yeah.
Mike's thing, like if you convinced yourself that you're really helping, you're saving something, or you're like even organic foods, or if you have children and you're like, I mean, I'm a little bit of tick-borne illnesses or whatever. It's hard to like enjoy certain outdoor activities now and things like that, but you probably know you're being overly anxious about it, but you feel like you're saving your kids from some potentially, or yourself, or whatever.
This is fantastic. I love this.
I mean,
this is why Q&A is the best.
So
No, go ahead if you have
that's sort
something
of like the line of,
Yeah, when there is logic to it.
because I was going to ask the same thing. Right.
Yeah. So Gary's thing there is very, you know, when it's based in fear, you need to be on high alert right away.
Yeah.
Right? Meaning that you can almost be certain that you're overthinking. Does that make any sense? Because you're rooted, that's where it's coming from. And by the way, it's coming from force, not power. It's coming from a sense of lack, not abundance. Does that make any sense? Like, in other words, a sense of abundance is my kids are going to be okay. Now, I know, work with me here for a minute, okay? My kids are going to be okay. Fear, scarcity, is they're not. We default there. And most of us default there, by the way. I mean, it's a common place to do. Now, what's the right place? Somewhere in the middle, obviously, right? Not who. What's that? Yeah, I hope they're, yeah, well, that's it. I like that. That would have been much clever. I wish I had said it. He said, I hope they're okay. So, sorry, that gets me going. So, fear is obviously something that we should be mindful of right away, that we can almost assume immediately that we're going to be overthinking something. There's another thing, and I actually just, because I just finishing the book here as I am pretty much finished with it, and the last thing was fear, because it's a 3-part book, so I only deal with the first 3, and the last one is fear. And this is not going to help, but this is the fact. This is what to me, clarity is everything. So you're not going to control all that stuff. The only reason you want to control all that stuff is because you don't have a sense of your connection with what I'm talking about. The reality is, no matter how much you do, no matter how much you inform yourself, no matter how much you try to protect your child, try to protect your health, you name it, there's just a lot of unknown in the world. And that is just the way that it is. Those are not comforting words, but if you get in touch with your authentic person of power, that won't be a problem. I don't know if that sounds lame, like some major cop-out, but it is absolutely true. Steve's got a question or a statement? I don't, okay, I mean, it's really important. Hold on, Steve, I'm sorry, you got it, right? You're sure? I just want to really emphasize the fact that you're not going to avoid that. You're fooling yourself. It's not pleasant to hear, but it's necessary to hear. You're not gonna control all the things in the world. Eventually, if you get enough touch with authentic personal power, you won't feel the need to. Like, that's my favorite part. Now, do I want any harm to come to my children? No, I don't want any harm to come to my children. Will it? I don't know. Can I deal with it? Yes, I can deal with it. I don't know. It makes me want to cry saying it because I don't want anything to happen to my kids, right? But this is the world. We fool ourselves, though, when we spend a lot of time. And by the way, not good time with our kids. We're not there for the kids the way we should be when we're wrapped up in that stuff. You know, Leah, right? I mean, sorry, go ahead, Steve. I just wanted to really emphasize that point.
I wanted to actually bounce something off you.
Yeah.
Past couple months, I'm dealing with a friend of mine in Nevada who's been experiencing high levels of anxiety.
Yeah.
And to the point where it was toxic and obsessive.
Sure.
And everybody saw it but him.
No kidding. Well, that's surprising.
And what was happening was he got involved in watching media, these conspiracy, they're designing algorithms to suck you in and just drain you and put you in fear. And it seemed that kind of took over his life, and it was really kind of freaking people out around him. So here it puts us in a position where we want to help, but they're not listening.
Sure.
So over the course of time, fortunately, and I guess the question is, do you see that the world, things that go on in the world, media, whatever it is, almost conspire to raise your level of anxiety,
to
distract you,
absolutely,
to draw you out of where you need to be centered? And that does seem to be really strongly what was happening with him. And finally, after several months, I helpfully convinced him that maybe what you're doing is a bad idea, and just stop doing that. And the last time I spoke to him, he had stopped doing that, or at least he had only done it a little bit here and there.
Yeah. Well, it's an addiction, so he's going to have,
And the mania that I had been hearing in his voice, and to the people who have called me and say, you better talk to this guy, because he's losing it. His demeanor had changed, his voice had changed, it's almost like the level of anxiety had obviously diminished, and he for a moment, kind of acknowledge that maybe it was a bad idea for him to get tied up in the actual cause of this anxiety, and it almost became an addiction. Is that something that
an addiction. Well, all of it is, by the way. Where'd Leah go? Well, all of it is. Anxiety is an addiction. Depression is an addiction.
So you think part of it is to just identifying what's advantageous and what it isn't, and trying to have the will and understanding to just take yourself out of those situations that are causing.
You're talking about what your friend should do or could do?
Well, I think for any of us, I mean, sometimes, you need somebody else from the outside to help you get there. But even within ourselves, we say, what's the source of, what am I experiencing in regards to anxiety? And you think sometimes you can identify what the root is and hopefully just avoid it.
Well, that's self-awareness, right? I mean, does that make sense?
Yeah, that's why. I think that's what we're saying.
And a lot of us don't have very much of it. So, I mean, it's probably one of the number one things that if we, cultivate something in ourselves, that would be a useful thing to cultivate, right? A challenging thing, though, especially for somebody like that, right, where they're pretty in the ditch, lost. It's cruel to say, but it is what it is, right? So to gain self-awareness when you've gotten that wrapped up is, it's challenging. Especially, you know what I mean? It really is. Now here's the difficult thing, right? If you're somebody like yourself, I mean, you can't make somebody have self-awareness,
well,
right?
Well, that's the other part of the story is I found that over the course of time in dealing with this, I was starting experiencing pretty high levels of anxiety and not be able to help.
Oh, yeah.
Because it took a long time for him to get there and see that he had to change the way he was operating to get out of the ditch he was in.
Yes, and this is authentic personal power stuff again, and I beat on the same drum, but it's because it's important. So, in my experience, as I step deeper and deeper into my authentic, as I'm stepping, by the way, I'm not done or something, stepping deeper and deeper into my authentic, you find that your influence on the world tends to naturally do that sort of stuff. So one, I have less conflict in my life. Ironically, I just had a major conflict, but that's the first in a long, long time. And you have less conflict. Your influence on people, not because you're trying to, but just your general basic vibe, is useful and helpful for people. It helps calm them down. One of the reasons is too, by the way, it's so common, by the way, trying to help somebody with anxiety to get anxiety. It's contagious in that way, right? And that's because you're not grounded. I had a quote in one of the videos that was my quote too, and it said something about, you don't help somebody by getting involved in their drama. You help them by seeing past it, seeing who they really are. That's what I feel like I always do in the office. If I can do anything in the office, that's it. I see the person for who they really are. And a lot of times that isn't anything that they're saying. Funny enough. Not that I'm not listening to what they're saying. I'm listening to them. I'm there with them. But I'm not buying everything. So therefore, when somebody's laying a lot of anxiety, I'm not experiencing anxiety. I don't know if that makes any sense, but it's because because you can get caught up in it. You can get caught up in it. Yeah.
And maybe it's something that it might be easier for somebody that you really don't know personally, if you haven't known for a long time and aren't invested.
Sure.
It's easier to be detached.
I get it.
But I think that if you are the kind of person that wants to move the ball in a positive direction and help people, if you don't possess the art of just being at peace, regardless of the situation.
Yeah, detachment.
You can get consumed by getting involved.
Yeah.
And that is true.
Yep. Yeah, I did the video. That video was about picking up dog poop. It was my spiritual video about picking up dog poop. And actually that video did not come out anything like, we did so many takes. I picked up so much poop. No, I did so many takes before I got, and that wasn't even close to what I wanted that video to be about. I don't know, it was just one of those things that just didn't jive. But one of the things was, because we were dealing with a bunch of stuff in our life at that time, and it got me thinking about that, is that that's what that's like in a way. Now, it's derogatory. It seems not nice to talk about people's problems as poop, right? But it's their shit. It's not yours, right? It doesn't mean you can't help them, but you don't pick it up. You don't play with it. When you do that, you end up stinking. That's what I really wanted to say in the video. And I didn't say, actually, those words never came out of my mouth. But that's what happens, though, right? If you get too involved in their poop, you end up stinking. You get anxiety. Oh, my God, yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, right. Sorry. Yes, I love it. All right. Sorry. Anybody else? Because I'm probably doing these really. Yes. Finally, I was like, Kristen's not gonna. It's because I was like a jerk last time, and I was like, I know I was. I can be like that. I need more self-awareness. You have to help me. Go ahead. Okay.
So my thing is that, his friend, he likes that stuff. And the sitting on the couch and eating your cake and ice cream and watching your favorite show, he liked it.
Yeah.
I don't want to necessarily stop doing it because like I said to you, so if I'm not sitting on the couch watching my TV show and eating ice cream, which I actually
I know you don't, yeah.
then what am I going to be doing and who am I? It feels so vague and it feels really hard to give up these things that we're attached to.
I know.
That we really sort of like in our small little way.
No, it's totally true. And most of them are harmless, by the way. I didn't get into that. I think I rushed through it a little bit, but, part of that way is don't pick up the phone once in a while. You're exercising an inner muscle. You're exercising a muscle that will help you combat, I don't like the word, but combat anxiety. Because when you feed that weakness or you don't ever do anything about it, you're constantly giving the keys to thinking. So it's totally in control. Whatever it thinks about, you do it. That's what it is. Whatever pops in your head, and you know this one. We've talked about that a bit, right? I mean, is that really what you need or really what you want? Probably not. Sometimes it's quite destructive, right? So, but lots of times it is harmless. I do want to state that, right? But it's useful to refrain from some of those harmless things once in a while, just to exercise baby steps towards building inner strength.
I think that I have a hard time with that. With yoga, it's easy because I went on Amazon and I found a 30-day yoga thing.
Okay.
And once you've done the yoga for 30 days, it's in your daily routine.
Sure.
And then so I've been doing it pretty much every day since January. So
Awesome.
that stuff. But with the stuff that you're talking about, I'm having a hard time just getting that. I feel like I'm having a hard time getting that ball rolling because I sort of need something like a step to do every single day. It's
Sure.
like that yoga practice that I'm not actually finding or relating to in some way. Probably meditating is number one.
It
Well,
is.
obviously it is. But you know what I mean? It's
I
like
do.
you're saying, it is about a goal, but it's not like I'm having a hard time being clear, like what is my goal and how do I start that? How do I implement that on a daily basis like I do with the yoga?
I do. Meditate. It's a good one. And it sounds so heavy, but, but you were doing mindfulness a lot. Is that still something? Or is it, I know you were saying it's kind of annoying.
It needs to be more than I want to do more.
I know. That's, yes,
I
you
want
do.
the elixir, okay?
You want the elixir.
There, I said it.
I'm handing it to you. It's free. You already have it. Yes. I think this has to do with, and this gets back to a long time ago, talk about faith a little bit. Realizing that something is going on, even when it's small. And that was the last time, right? Because your first thing was, you were the first person with the question, and I said, there's no such thing as a small thing. So first of all, you have to know that you are actually doing something. I would say the small things are like that. Like, they're real things, though, right? Don't pick up the phone, or, meaning check Facebook is what I'm really talking about. I'm talking about, hey, don't answer the phone call. I'm talking about don't check Facebook, don't post that thing. Do you really need to post that thing? These are something that is a really useful question to ask, because it's an urge. It's an addiction. And when you feed it all the time, you're just feeding that weakness, right? maybe more important, more powerful is our interactions with other people. And usually those are the ones that we're closest to, that are the hardest, like vulnerability. To actually engage in it, You have to have a willing partner, in a way. I shouldn't say that, because you still could do it, but it's more useful, I think, when it's, there are specific things, too, by the way, but that gets kind of,
Well, it's kind of like little breakups. Like, you have to break up. There's trade-offs, right? You have to break up with certain things that you kind of are attached to, you kind of love in order to...
Because you can only focus on so many things, by the way. That beam of light can only take in so much. So you need to pick and choose what's important, what's useful, you know what I mean? What builds you towards authentic personal power as opposed to weakens it all the time. Does that make any sense? So finding those things, pulling in that focus is the big, realizing that is doing something. That's what that's what I'm trying to convey. I don't know if I'm doing a very good job of it. Like, it's more powerful than you think. The subtle, small little thing. You do have to do it consistently, like yoga, by the way, and that's a huge thing. I know you want more, but that's a huge thing. Let that play out a little while too. Do you know what I mean? You don't even know the effects of yoga that it might be having on you. By the way, there's all kinds of yoga. So some might be, some are very physically based, some are more spiritually based, right? So some are not going to really get you that in touch, or they're only going to take you so far in authentic personal power, where others will take you much farther. Does that make any sense to you? Because it's the goal, too. That's the thing about knowing where you're trying to go. And I know it's vague. There's not much I can do about it. Do you have a question? Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you looked like you were like Mikey. You were probably just confused. What the hell is he saying? No. Anyways, I don't know if that helped at all. Having something to do is useful, by the way. I'm not, having a concrete thing is useful. I'm not real, we talked about journaling, haven't we? That's a very, very, no, that's another really powerful one. And by the way, if you notice that there's these ones you're avoiding all the time, those are, I'm saying it, it was true for me too, and it is true for me still. Do you know what I mean? Okay. Anybody else? We're good. We're good. It's getting kind of late again anyways. Thank you, everybody.